The soft buzz of Nathan Blake's phone vibrated across his polished mahogany desk, interrupting the quiet hum of his corner office on the 40th floor of the Blake Grand Hotel in Chicago. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan glimmered in the late morning sun. Nathan, dressed in a crisp gray suit, was wrapping up a conference call about the expansion of his hotel chain into Florida. He almost ignored the call, an unknown number, but something, perhaps instinct or that unexplainable parental pull, urged him to pick up. "Mr. Blake?" A man's voice said, calm but edged with formality. "Yes, this is he," Nathan replied, already sensing something was wrong. "This is Officer Daniels with the Chicago Police Department," the voice continued, followed by a pause, one of those pauses that only come before news that breaks your world. "I'm very sorry to inform you, there's been an accident involving your son, Lucas." Nathan's chest tightened, a vice of fear squeezing his breath away. His fingers clenched the phone tighter. At the Lakeside Athletic Club, the officer continued. "He was in the pool with the instructor. The paramedics tried, they did everything they could, but he didn't make it, sir." The words struck like ice water. Nathan's body froze, then trembled. The phone slipped from his grasp and landed on the plush carpet below with a dull thud. He didn't even hear the rest. A sound echoed through the vast office, a raw, low sob that he realized, seconds later, was his own. His driver was already waiting downstairs. Nathan didn't remember calling for the car, but somehow, it was there. The world around him blurred as he rode through the city. The bustling Chicago streets faded into the background. All he could hear was the faint echo of his son's voice that morning over breakfast. "Dad, today I'm going to swim like a dolphin. Watch me next week." Lucas had been 5 years old, bright-eyed, missing his 2 front teeth, and obsessed with sea creatures. Tuesdays were always swim lesson days. The routine had never changed, until now. When Nathan arrived at the hospital, St. Mary's ER smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. A doctor in a white coat met him with solemn eyes and clinical words, "Drowning, no response, and finally, we need you to identify the body." The cold morgue chilled more than his skin. On the gurney lay a boy who looked just like Lucas. Same dark curls, same tiny freckles across the nose. But the light, Lucas's boundless, joyful light, was gone. Nathan knelt beside the lifeless form, his knees against the freezing tile, and whispered through trembling lips, "I'm so sorry, buddy. I should have been there." And in that moment, Nathan Blake, the millionaire, the empire builder, the man with everything, was simply a father, broken in two. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip behind the Chicago skyline, casting long golden shadows between the hospital buildings. Nathan Blake stood alone outside the emergency exit of St. Mary's Hospital, leaning against the cool red brick wall. The air smelled faintly of rain, though none had fallen yet. His tailored suit clung to him, damp with sweat and grief. His legs finally gave out, and he sank slowly onto the concrete, knees pulled to his chest like a boy himself. The world felt still, as if time had frozen out of respect for his heartbreak. Passers-by cast glances, some pitying, others quickly averted. No one quite knew what to do with a man so clearly shattered. That's when he heard it. A small voice, barely above a whisper. "Sir?" Nathan looked up through bloodshot eyes. A little girl stood a few feet away in the alley, almost hidden in the lengthening shadows. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. Her brown hair was tangled, her jeans torn at the knees, and the oversized sweatshirt she wore hung off her thin frame. But her eyes, wide, steady, and much too old for her age, met his without flinching. "You're the man from the news, aren't you? The one whose little boy..." She stopped, then added gently, I'm sorry. Nathan tried to offer a nod, but his throat clenched too tightly. She stepped a little closer, glancing around nervously. I know this sounds crazy, but your boy, Lucas, isn't dead. Nathan blinked, thinking maybe he hadn't heard right. I saw what really happened, she said, barely audible. He got out of the pool. He was coughing. Then a man in a suit grabbed him. For a moment, Nathan just stared, numb. Was this some cruel joke? Or the fantasy of a child who didn't understand grief? But then she said, he wore a fancy watch. Big and shiny. And your son, he had blue swim trunks with yellow stars. Right? Nathan's heart slammed into his ribs. How could she know that? That was Lucas's favorite swimsuit. He wore it every Tuesday. His hands began to shake as he reached out gently. What's your name? Maddie, she whispered, stepping back slightly. I'm not supposed to talk to grown-ups. But I couldn't let you think he was gone. Do you remember anything else? A car? A plate number? She nodded, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper from her hoodie. Written in messy pencil was a license plate and a small drawing of a watch. Nathan held the paper like it was sacred. His voice cracked. Why are you telling me this? Because someone should. In that quiet alley behind the hospital, beneath the coming twilight, a flicker of hope returned to Nathan Blake's soul. Maybe, just maybe, his son was still out there. And the only one who believed it was a little girl no one had noticed. Nathan sat motionless in Lucas's room that night, the boy's favorite stuffed bear clutched in his hands. The room still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the cookies they'd baked last weekend. His son's sneakers sat by the door, laces untied just the way he always left them. It had been over 24 hours since the hospital, and the fog of grief hadn't fully lifted, but Maddie's words echoed in his mind like a bell refusing to quiet. Lucas didn't die. I saw him. A man took him. Nathan had spent the entire day replaying the conversation, questioning his sanity, and poring over every detail Maddie had shared. That drawing, with the license plate scrawled in childish handwriting and the sketch of a large watch, it wasn't something a child could fake. And that swimsuit description? The stars? No news outlet had released that information. Only someone who had actually seen Lucas that day could have known. And then there was the scar. Maddie had described a lightning-shaped scar behind Lucas's right ear, a remnant of a tumble from the backyard swing set 2 years ago. It was small, hidden beneath his hair. Nathan had forgotten it was even there. But Lucas hated wearing his swim cap over it, always said it pinched funny. The girl had even mimicked how Lucas had taken it off and rubbed it that day. How could she have known that? It was enough to shake the foundation of everything Nathan thought was real. The next morning, fueled by the faint hope that Maddie's story might be true, Nathan reached out to Kevin Monroe, his college friend and longtime attorney. If anyone could quietly help verify what he now feared was a horrifying deception, it was Kevin. They met at Kevin's office downtown, a stately space tucked inside an old red brick building with creaky wooden floors and the smell of pipe tobacco lingering from decades past. Nathan sat with his head in his hands while Kevin reviewed the preliminary coroner's report. "You're not going to believe this," Kevin said finally, laying a document on the table. "Try me," Nathan muttered. "The body you identified, the fingerprints don't match Lucas's birth records." Nathan looked up slowly. "What are you saying?" Kevin hesitated, then said softly, "That wasn't your son in the morgue." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The weight of the revelation was too great. Grief, confusion, and an ember of hope all churned in Nathan's chest. "Then where is he?" Nathan asked, his voice hoarse. Kevin looked him in the eye. "That's what we're going to find out." It was no longer just a father's gut instinct, it was fact. Lucas was alive. And somewhere out there, someone had gone to great lengths to make the world believe otherwise. The old oak photo frame on Nathan Blake's desk held a memory he hadn't looked at in years: his younger brother, Ryan, grinning beside him at the grand opening of their first hotel in downtown Denver. Back then, they'd both been dreamers. Ryan was still the quiet one, better with numbers than people. Nathan handled the spotlight, while Ryan managed logistics behind the scenes. Now, as Nathan stared at that photo, the edges of the frame trembling in his hands, he felt a chill he couldn't shake. Kevin's confirmation that the body wasn't Lucas's had ignited something sharp in Nathan's gut. This was no random tragedy. Someone had planned this, staged it. And the more he examined the details, the clearer it became: the person or people behind it had access to personal, sensitive information. Information only someone close to him could have. Maddie had mentioned a man in a suit with gray at the temples and a shiny watch. That description gnawed at Nathan. There were many who fit the profile, but only a few had enough motive and access to orchestrate such an elaborate scheme. That night, unable to sleep, Nathan pulled out a legal pad and scribbled down names of people he'd once trusted: former business partners, rival hotel owners, ex-employees. Near the bottom of the list, almost as an afterthought, he wrote Ryan Blake. He paused, staring at the name. Could his own brother? The next morning, Nathan visited the Blake Foundation's private records vault, where confidential files on staff history, investment reports, and internal audits were kept. Ryan had handled most of the company's financial oversight for years, and Nathan had rarely questioned his decisions. But something didn't sit right. Among the files, Nathan found a series of internal memos. One caught his attention. 6 months prior, a large disbursement had been made from a discretionary account Ryan managed. It had been routed through a shell company called Northgate Solutions, with no listed purpose. When he cross-referenced the routing numbers, his heart skipped. It matched the same account that had paid Lexi, the nanny, just weeks before Lucas's disappearance. His hands clenched the pages tightly. His brother, his own flesh and blood, had funded the woman who was supposed to protect Lucas. He needed answers. Later that day, Nathan drove to Ryan's home in the suburbs, a stately 2-story colonial with a wide front porch and manicured lawn. The kind of house where children rode bikes and neighbors waved from driveways. Ryan answered the door in casual slacks and a golf polo, clearly surprised. "Nate? What's going on?" Nathan didn't wait for pleasantries. "You know what this is about." Ryan's expression flickered, just for a moment, but Nathan caught it. Not confusion. Recognition. "You funded her," Nathan said, voice tight. "Lexi. The shell account, Northgate. It was you." Ryan stepped back slightly, his face hardening. "You don't understand," he said. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this." The words chilled Nathan to the core. Because now, it was clear, betrayal hadn't come from strangers. It had come from within the family. The rain came in steady sheets as Nathan sat parked outside an unfamiliar house tucked along the edge of a wooded road north of the city. The private investigator he had hired, Frank Doyle, a gruff ex-cop with a heart hidden under layers of cynicism, had traced the money trail further. What he found led Nathan to this place. It belonged to David Monroe, or at least, that was the name he once used. Frank had uncovered that Monroe was actually Daniel Morgan, an architect Nathan had briefly worked with 15 years ago during the construction of his first luxury hotel in Colorado Springs. Nathan barely remembered him. Just a quiet man who kept to himself, struggled with alcohol, and eventually vanished from the company after a dispute over contract clauses. It was a messy exit, but one of many during those chaotic early years. What Frank found next chilled Nathan to the bone. Daniel Morgan had lost a son, also 5 years old, to leukemia shortly after leaving Blake Enterprises. Medical bills had drained him. After being forced to sell his shares for pennies, Daniel's life had unraveled. Now, all these years later, he had reappeared. With a new name, a new identity, and an old grudge. Nathan knocked on the door, his shoulders soaked despite the umbrella. The man who answered had silver-streaked hair, calm eyes, and the quiet confidence of someone who had been expecting this visit. "You came," he said simply. "I know who you are," Nathan replied, stepping inside. "Or who you used to be." The inside of the house was orderly, too orderly. Framed blueprints hung on the walls, each labeled with hotel names Nathan recognized. It was a shrine to every hotel Nathan had built. And a monument to the life Daniel had lost. "You took everything from me," Daniel said, voice level, as he poured 2 cups of coffee like they were catching up after church. "I don't even remember the deal," Nathan admitted. "We had dozens of partners back then. Everything moved fast. I trusted the legal team too." "You buried a clause in the partnership agreement," Daniel interrupted, setting a cup on the table without looking at him. "One that let you devalue my shares when I was desperate." "My son was dying, Nathan." The silence in the room grew heavier than the storm outside. "I lost him. I lost my wife. And then I watched you rise, fortune, fame, interviews in Forbes. While I shoveled dirt onto a tiny casket." Nathan's throat tightened. There were no words. "You don't deserve your son," Daniel continued. "But you'll feel what I felt." Nathan rose, fists clenched. "Where is he? Where's Lucas?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he opened a drawer and slid a photo across the table. Lucas, sleeping in an unfamiliar room, clutching his stuffed bear. "I'm not done yet," Daniel said. Nathan stared at the image. Now he had a face. A motive. And the terrifying realization that the game was far from over. The wipers thumped back and forth as Nathan guided his black SUV along the winding mountain road, deep in the outskirts of Illinois. Night had fallen hard, and the rain now came in driving sheets, pounding the windshield like a drum. But Nathan didn't care. Lucas was alive, and he finally had a lead on where he was being held. Frank Doyle's latest intel had been specific: a secluded lake house on the northern shore of Willow Lake, about 60 miles outside Chicago. It was registered to a shell company. Quiet deliveries of groceries, children's snacks, and coloring books had been noted by a local delivery driver, items that only confirmed Nathan's deepest instincts. Lucas was there. And Nathan was going to get him back. He parked off-road in a clearing, nearly a mile from the property. Mud squished beneath his boots as he stepped into the storm, dressed in black from head to toe, a flashlight tucked into his jacket and a spare phone zipped in his side pocket. Frank had begged to come along, but Nathan refused. "This is my son," he'd said. "If anything happens, I need someone on the outside to call the police." The dense woods were slick and thick with underbrush. Branches snapped beneath his boots. But the rain muffled the sound, covering his approach. After 30 minutes of tense movement, he reached a rise that overlooked the property. The lake house stood proudly at the shoreline, built from cedar and stone. Warm light glowed behind shuttered windows. A small dock jutted out into the water, and a single boat bobbed in the choppy waves. Nathan used binoculars to scan the house. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, trading shifts every 30 minutes. There was a window. Nathan waited. At exactly 10:37 p.m., the guards began their rotation. The moment one rounded the corner and the other lit a cigarette by the front steps, Nathan ran low along the tree line. His pulse thundered in his ears. He crept to the back of the house, ducking behind a propane tank and slipping onto the covered porch. The back door, thank God, was unlocked. Inside, the house was silent except for the hum of a refrigerator and the distant murmur of a television. It smelled faintly of pine cleaner and something sweet, cookies, maybe. He tiptoed through the living room, past a hallway lined with family photos that weren't real families. Staged images. Fake perfection. Then he saw it. A small bedroom down the hall, superhero bed sheets, a teddy bear on the pillow, crayon drawings taped to the wall. One showed a stick figure labeled Lucas holding hands with another labeled Dad. Nathan's heart broke and swelled all at once. And then, voices. A man and a child. Lucas. Nathan moved silently toward the sound. Tonight, the storm might rage outside. But in Nathan's heart, there was only one mission: bring his boy home. Lucas's soft voice echoed from the kitchen, and Nathan froze just outside the doorway, heart pounding. "Can I watch a movie before bed?" the boy asked, his words gentle, uncertain. Nathan peeked around the corner. There he was, his son. Lucas sat at a small wooden table, a bowl of ice cream in front of him. He looked thinner, a little pale, but alive. Very much alive. Across from him stood a man drying a dish, David Monroe, the man who had orchestrated this nightmare. "Just one movie," David replied calmly. "Then lights out." As Lucas wandered toward the living room, cradling his bowl, Nathan slipped back into the shadows. He waited until the boy was alone, curled up on the couch, the flicker of cartoons dancing across his face. It took every ounce of willpower not to run to him. But Nathan moved slowly, crouched behind the sofa, then gently placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Lucas turned, and his eyes widened. "Daddy?" Tears flooded Nathan's eyes. He pulled the boy into his arms and held him tightly. "I've got you, buddy. I'm here. I'm taking you home." But their reunion was short-lived. A click echoed behind them. "How touching," David said, his voice cold as steel. He stood at the entryway, a pistol in his hand. "But I'm afraid the story doesn't end here." Nathan shifted his body to shield Lucas. "It's over, David." "No," David said. "You don't get to walk away. Not after what you did to me. To my son." "Lucas is innocent in all this," Nathan said. "You've made your point, let him go." From the side door, another figure appeared, Ryan Blake, Nathan's own brother. The betrayal hit Nathan like a second gunshot. "Ryan?" Nathan's voice cracked. "You were part of this?" Ryan looked away, ashamed. "You always had everything. The company, the credit, the legacy. I was tired of being in your shadow. You used my son for revenge?" Nathan's voice shook with disbelief. "We were never going to hurt him," Ryan said quickly. "Just scare you. Make you step down." It got out of hand. David raised the gun. "We're past apologies. You sign over control of the company to Ryan, and you both walk out. Otherwise." He didn't finish the sentence. But before Nathan could answer, a flash of blue and red lights washed through the windows. Sirens. Tires screeched outside. David hesitated. Nathan acted. In a swift motion, he lunged forward, knocking the gun from David's hand as Lucas scrambled away. The door burst open, and Frank Doyle led 2 officers into the room, weapons drawn. "Drop it," they shouted. David froze. Ryan lifted his hands. Within seconds, both men were cuffed and taken into custody. Nathan dropped to his knees, holding Lucas once more. "You're safe now," he whispered. "No one's taking you away again." And for the first time in days, the boy smiled. The morning sunlight streamed gently through the windows of the Blake home, casting a warm glow over the hardwood floors and the photographs lining the mantel, photos that now included a smiling Lucas and, in a recent addition, a young girl with watchful eyes and a cautious grin, Maddie. It had been 6 weeks since the stormy night at the lake house. 6 weeks since Lucas had returned home and the truth had unraveled, his uncle Ryan sentenced to prison, and David Monroe, broken by grief and rage, facing the full weight of justice. But today, the house was different. It was full. Lucas's laughter echoed from the backyard where he and Maddie played with their new puppy, a flop-eared rescue named Buddy. Nathan watched from the porch, his coffee warm in his hands, the morning air scented with spring blossoms. There had been moments when he thought he'd never see this again, never hear that laugh, never feel hope stir again. But here it was. Maddie, once a child of the streets, had slowly become part of the family. At first, she kept her distance, her clothes in a duffel bag, her heart walled off. She refused to unpack, refused to believe this would last. But Lucas, with all the pure acceptance only a child could offer, changed that. He brought her into his games, his stories, even his bedtime prayers. And Nathan? He found himself growing, too. The man who once measured life by quarterly reports and hotel expansions now measured it by dinners at the table, bedtime stories, and the sight of 2 children falling asleep with crayons still in their hands. The adoption paperwork for Maddie was nearly complete. She had no known family. Social services said no one had claimed her in 5 years. When asked what name she wanted on her new documents, she simply said, Maddie Blake, as if it had always been hers. That evening, after dinner and a few rounds of Go Fish, Maddie approached Nathan in the quiet hallway. "Do you still think about him?" she asked softly. "David?" Nathan asked, surprised. She nodded. "I do," he said honestly. "I think about the pain he carried, and how he let it twist him." Maddie looked up. "Do you think I'll ever stop feeling like I'm not supposed to be here?" Nathan knelt, his hands gently resting on her small shoulders. "You're exactly where you're meant to be," he said. "You saved my son. You saved me. This home wouldn't be whole without you." Her eyes shimmered, but she nodded, just once. Later that night, after tucking them both in, Nathan stood in the hallway for a long moment. The house, once too quiet, now pulsed with life. It no longer echoed with grief, but with giggles, whispered stories, and the soft creak of growing hearts. He didn't need towers of glass and steel to leave a legacy. He had something better, a family built from love, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. As we grow older, we often find ourselves looking back, measuring our lives not by the money we earned or the awards we collected, but by the people we touched, the love we gave, and the memories we made along the way. The story of Nathan Blake reminds us of one powerful truth: success means very little without someone to share it with. Nathan built an empire. His name was etched into luxury hotels and business magazines. But in a single moment, when he believed his son was gone, all of that became meaningless. No amount of wealth could replace a child's laugh or the touch of a small hand in yours. In his darkest hour, It wasn't his fortune that saved him, it was love, courage, and the voice of a forgotten little girl who refused to let the truth go unheard. There's a lesson here for all of us, especially those in the later seasons of life. We are reminded that family is not always defined by blood, but by loyalty, compassion, and shared experience. Maddie, a child with no home, became a daughter through kindness and trust. In helping Nathan find his son, she also found a place where she was finally seen, valued, and loved. The story also speaks to forgiveness, not just of others, but of ourselves. Nathan carried guilt for years, like many parents do. But healing began when he chose presence over perfection, when he let go of control and leaned into love. It's never too late to become the parent, the grandparent, or the mentor we long to be. In the end, this story reminds us that life is fragile, but redemption is possible. Even amid betrayal, grief, and hardship, we can build something beautiful. Not from money or ambition, but from the quiet moments, a bedtime story, a shared meal, a promise kept. So if you're reading this and wondering whether your best days are behind you, let this be your reminder: the most important things we build aren't buildings, but relationships. And sometimes, the greatest gifts arrive when we least expect them, wrapped in second chances and unexpected love.